Hello, you wonderful people, and welcome to another episode of Super-Fanta-Fi. This being a show where it's about TV shows of the supernatural, fantasy, and or science fictional genre. For today's episode, I'm going to talk about the latest episode of Debris. A lot of interesting things went down in this episode, so let's break it down. Well, first and foremost, obviously, picking up kind of after the events of the last episode, Brian's getting tested to make sure, there's no side effects of him being, cloned. Makes you wonder, what about other dude? I guess he'd already gotten tested too. Granted, he was cloned a lot, so you would almost think there'd be more ramifications for him, but we don't see any of that, so it seems like he might be more okay. But it's still the whole conversation that Brian's like, hey, if the MI6 was aware of Finola's dad, George, still being alive, then they would have taken her out, I'd gotten her out of the country, away from us, beforehand, because it's the moment this information comes out, it's going to get ugly. And that's him making an excuse, yeah, we could, go call some back channels. It's oh yeah, the Dutch dude. It's you didn't like the Dutch dude. It's yeah, but he was, he was awesome. But it's he was trying to work in a way to look after Finola without kind of expressing it to his boss, because his boss, Maddox, would have been whoa, look at you getting sentimental. Maddox probably still sees through it, but Brian's trying to keep up appearances. But I think for him, it's he just wants, because I think he also wants Finola to be back home in case this kind of information comes out. And also, when they exhume her dad's body, he kind of wanted her to kind of be back home to kind of deal with it, because he also knows, everything with her sister, too. So, but it's still let's keep this under wraps. And it's sure. So, the next situation involves, what made this situation really interesting, because for them it's there was no debris nearby, but it's dealing with this square that just popped up in the middle of a field, and it's okay, so what's this all about? Because by the time they actually get there, it's gone, but Tom and them had taken video of it. But what was interesting though is while they were there, some of the audio that got picked up was only picked up on recordings. They didn't actually hear it themselves in person. So, but then while doing some recording about the particular day's events, it ends up being a situation where Finola hears this recording, and it's not some audio gets picked up. She picks up part of it, and then Muntz and the others end up picking up the other parts of it, because the square, when it initially pops up, it looks like there's people kind of touching it. Oh my God, here's a screen. They're literally touching a screen or a wall trying to get out. So, but what was really interesting is everything escalates. They quickly find out, they actually get closer and realize, obviously, she's picking up, she's responding to them through some frequency. She's oh, I can see the lights, and it's doesn't make any sense. It was daytime, but it's she was talking, it wasn't from before, that's from right now. She can see the lights now. She can see the people out. But the thing is, the way she's in there, she can see them and they can kind of see her, but they can also see other shadows. So it's wherever she is in that space, her and the other people aren't interacting with each other, which is they're basically on different dimensional frequencies, essentially, which is kind of how Finola kind of puts it. Because we end up finding out Finola's dad already theorized some of this stuff. He calls them access points. That basically, we only perceive 3 dimensions, but he's saying that there might be as many as 11 different dimensions, but they're so closely tight knit together. They're so thinly right beside each other, curled up together, you can't see them. The human eye can't see them, but they're there, and these access points are one where those points where those dimensions kind of uncurl a little bit. So it begs the question, is that square one particular dimension, or is it multiple dimensions stacked upon each other? Because they ended up finding out the girl, she says her name is Nicole, she went missing in 2019. So if she's in this one dimension, but she can't see the many other people there, are each one of them on a different dimensional layer? Or is it that one, because you would almost think it can't be just that one dimension, and because if that one dimension had other section to it, those would be other dimensional sections within that one dimension. So it is literally dimensions layered on top of each other, interestingly enough. I thought that was so fascinating. But also the real twist to this to them was why is there no debris here? If the debris is causing all of this, then, but it's they end up kind of figuring out that because of what George theorized, because Nicole went missing in 2019, the debris didn't start falling until 6 months ago. So then a part of me is thinking are we dealing with some time travel stuff? Yes, and maybe not necessarily, just because with dimensional stuff like this, we're dealing with time and space, and things get a little crazy, a little wonky. Which is also an interesting thing too, because that's something I kind of thought about just because of like the Arrowverse. Like certain worlds seem like they're on the same time frame of like, yeah, like it's kind of a 1-for-1, but then it seems like, across different dimensions and, across like kind of like the multiverse and like, the DC stuff, it seemed like I was wondering, like, maybe time works a little differently in each world, so things don't 100% work. It's not always a 1-to-1. It might be a 3-to-1 or a 5-to-1. Like, you never know. So it seems like that kind of applies in this particular case, where it's like there isn't a 1-for-1, because for her, it's like she says, like, yeah, I've been wandering around for a few hours. It's like for her, it's been a few hours. In total, it's been like maybe like, because it might be like 2020 or 2021 in the time frame of the show. So she's been missing at least a year or two. So that kind of makes things even crazier. But the reason why I was thinking like maybe there was some time travel involved, like maybe the debris kind of like, but then it was like, oh, because we don't know the full capabilities of all of the debris. So I was wondering if maybe like the debris somehow went back in time, grabbed her, and kind of like she's in this kind of limbo dimension right now, kind of trapped in this, space / time pocket or something like that. But it turns out like these access points have always been there. It's just that the debris accessed it because they end up finding out there's a piece of debris nearby, and that's why every once in a while it gets stronger to the point that they can see the square, because the nearby device is some kind of module that kind of amplified that. Because it turns out like, that the reason why this device is doing that is because it actually serves a similar purpose for the ship. That basically it isn't just this spaceship that debris is falling from, these pieces and everything, it isn't just I'm about to call it the travel across the Star Ocean, which just makes me, because of the video game. So I'm always going to refer to a space as the Star Ocean now, just because I think that's always like a very beautiful romanticized way of just saying space, the Star Ocean. But it's not just Star Oceanal travel, it's extra dimensional travel. So it's not like, we're not just talking about aliens here, we're potentially talking about aliens from a different dimension, or beings in general from a different dimension. So that's why, so the access points have nothing to do with them. Potentially, maybe, once again, maybe they've been to Earth before, but it seems like this is kind of like potentially the first contact. So it just has it, because this device is used to travel between dimensions, it's able to like point out and kind of intensify the signal that is the access point. So I just like, once again, when I was younger, I never used to be the science fiction dude. I get super geeky about this. I'm not well versed enough in science stuff to apply that science fiction is based in taking like real science, and applying it to like absurd levels and stuff like that. So if I had understood science a little bit better, I'd probably geek out a little bit more. But also maybe if I was more well versed in science, it'd probably ruin it. I'm like, that can never happen, blah, 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 because of the laws of science. That doesn't make any sense. So yeah, but it's interesting to just think about. I hadn't touched on it, but they did bring in Nicole's dad, Richard, in to try, obviously, they had to quickly explain. He's like, who are you? It's like, yeah, we're part of a government that deals with scientific anomalies, and so we think this is what happened to your daughter. It's like, because it was like an instant. He was like, I was in there shopping. She would go into the car. By the time I came out, she was gone. No explanation for it. So I think it's like they figured like, the more of an emotional response she was having, the longer maybe the square could stay around. So their dad was there to kind of bridge that gap, to kind of draw more of an emotional response from her, so that way she ended up sticking around. And it kind of works, but it's not strong enough, because it turns out like the module device doesn't have much power left. Like it's weakening and waning, so that's why the signal isn't necessarily strong. What I thought was interesting is Muntz is kind of that scientific, he's kind of like the scientific asshole that's like, I'm super smart, but I'm kind of not well with people to a certain extent, because obviously like you have, for one, Brian did something where he kind of took some very expensive equipment and kind of smacked something to like kind of quickly makeshifted something together, almost kind of MacGyvered something. And Muntz was like, yeah, you shouldn't do that. Like, he's like, have you ever heard of Agent Kelvin? And it's like, Kelvin, no. He's like, yeah, he touched a piece of debris and ended up getting turned inside out. And it's like, well, my way of survival, Muntz, how I get around stuff like that is I wait for the other guy to touch the debris. And the Muntz almost looking like, wait, what? That, like, he's almost looking at Brian like, oh, you're an asshole. Which I even love later on. It's like, Monts is like, I've got an idea. Brian, I need you to reach in that refrigerator and pull out like a blue rectangular box. They hand it to him and they're looking like, what is he about to do? And then like he opens it up and it turns out to be like a yogurt or something. He starts eating. Brian's looking like, and Finola kind of looks at Brian like, oh, wow. Because he at the time, he was like, I don't know how to really deal with this situation. I don't know. Later on, he was saying like he doesn't know how to help Nicole out of her current circumstances. But Muntz was kind of suggesting like we can't, like, this is not only space travel but also extra dimensional travel. Like we need to maintain as much energy that's left in this thing, because if we don't, there's no guarantee. Like, this is like a first huge leap for humanity, so we can't like just let this go. But Finola's like, no, we need to use that to get them out. Which even Muntz is being like, we can't, basically saying like, we can't waste this on them. But Brian kind of makes a middle ground where it's like, well, if it kind of acts as an amplifier for the access point, why don't we just bring it closer? And that kind of brings it in more focus. It ends up stretching it out. So I thought that was interesting, but still they couldn't get to, even though they could see her, they still couldn't get to Nicole. So they're using the other piece of the ship that was already dead. It's like, obviously the way the device worked, like at least the debris worked, it, acted as kind of like a bridge to the access point. So by pushing that through, it made it so they could get Nicole out. But it wasn't just Nicole. They managed to pull everyone out, though everyone's from different points in time. One lady was from 1976, another dude was like 89, and it's like, okay. So a lot of people over the years have just been falling into these access points, and it's like, that's sucky, because like some of those people, it's like, some of y'all, for all we know, might have had little kids that are full-grown adults, might even be like grandparents at this point in time, which is actually even sadder, because like some of you might have family that's long gone, whether it's your parents, siblings, you never know. Like a lot can change in like 30, 40 years, so that's depressing. As I like, Nicole kind of lucked out that she was an in there alum. She talked about that like for her, it felt like obviously things kind of moved slowly in there, so there was a few hours angle, but for her, like the fear and being afraid, that's what felt like an eternity to her. But what I thought was really interesting is that she said she had this dream about her dad, and obviously her dad had talked about it earlier in the episode. It is the exact dream, obviously just from her perspective of like finding you in a parking lot and we hugged, and it's like, so there was some part of them knowing and believing that the other was still out there and that they'd be reunited. Now, this is what something Finola was kind of getting at, because basically like gravity is as powerful as it is, but it is something we can't see, that basically the bonds between people are the same thing, that even though spread across different dimensions, that love and that connection is so strong that they both felt it on some level. He had the dream and so did she, so that kind of kept both of them going. Like, despite her circumstances, thinking about her dad kept her going, and obviously him believing his daughter was out there somewhere kept him going. So it was beautiful in that regard. So, and that was kind of a very interesting story. And obviously this a lot of interesting elements to this too, because for Finola, having to, she learned about obviously the access points from watching older videos of her dad. And for her, it's like, she realized she was mad at her dad. Like, she was so mad at her dad because, remember, in her mind, it's like, oh, my dad killed himself and left me. And it's like, she was mad at him, but it's like that anger kind of covered up. She didn't realize it because she was so mad. She didn't realize, it made her kind of realize, right, I'm also like this because I miss him so much. That was kind of buried underneath that. So, and obviously it's such a hard thing, because you can even tell for Brian, it's like, he feels like such a dick, because it's like, I know your dad's out there and I can't give you this information. And it's like, he realizes Finola's a good person, and he, it's like for her, hearing that, seeing this father and daughter reunited, which I didn't even think about at the time. It's like, right, that probably hits at her even deeper of like, right, like she wishes she had some more time with her dad, especially where things are with her sister. Like, I'm sure like losing him like sent her spiraling even more so. I also didn't talk about it either that they also discovered the they were close to running into the influx group, and obviously as they were closing in, they just magically disappear. So it's like, once again, like, how do you have access to the technology you have? Is it some byproduct of the debris that they're able to harness and give them what they can do, like teleport? Because part of me was almost halfway expecting when Brian and Finola came upon them, and it's like they're going, I was like, oh, are they actually still there and they're just invisible, like maybe, but it's like, I guess they teleported away. Like, obviously it's not a surefire thing because one of their buddies teleported into a cement pillar ended up dying, so it's not a surefire thing. So it's probably like a last resort type of thing, under like in case of emergencies, break glass type of thing. But other than that, an interesting development we learned about is Maddox. That obviously we knew that he was up to some shady stuff. It seemed like the government was up to some shady stuff, but it seems like he's got some shady business on the side where it turns out he's trying to sell a particular piece of debris because for whatever reason, like the Russians in particular want it. And it's like, I don't know what you want it for, and I don't want to know. Like, you do whatever you want to. So I was like, what are you getting out of this? Because at first he's like, yeah, other countries want to act like this is an arms race. And he's like, yeah, it technically is, because everyone's trying to build this ship and have access to this technology and figure out what it's fully capable of, sure. But it seems like he's just trying to make some money off on the side. I'm like, why? What? For what purpose? Like, maybe it's a thing of he's like, I think we get introduced to potentially his son's circumstances because a lady calls up and is like, hey, Linda or whatever isn't here. But it's like, I think his child's name is like Dario or something. And it's like, maybe it's like a medical situation where you don't have enough money, so you're trying to make money. Or maybe you're hopeful that this debris situation will help your child in some shape or form. I don't know. But he seems like he has his own circumstances. Granted, what sucks is the guy he's trying to make deals with, the people on Maddox's side found out, like, yeah, it seems like he's in the country. So I guess maybe it's like case-wise, like they've crossed paths before, like Maddox and this dude, because he's like, yeah, gotta let you know that Tarakov is in town or something like that. So it's like, it seems like I said, there might be some like crossing of paths previously. Like maybe it's like, oh, like I busted him, or maybe I pretended like, oh, he got away from me, but we had an understanding, like he'll help me out and I'll help him out from time to time. But now it sucks because it's like, well, I can't necessarily go be like, even if he sets up the whole thing of, hey, I'm willing to get that debris piece off of you, can't really help you now because now they're on to you and that draw too much attention. But he even had this moment later on where he's throwing a chair into like a wall of debris, and then we see it kind of like another wall of debris behind him, and it just kind of slides out. So it's kind of like a portal in its own right. So once again, we're getting bits and pieces to his circumstances, but it doesn't seem like he's necessarily the best guy either, sadly. Ryan shouldn't be listening to him as much, but to be fair, we don't know, like, his circumstances it might have been a family thing, like I said, maybe money issue that put her under these circumstances, maybe not, so we'll see where things kind of go from there. But obviously, he has his team in London investigating George, and it turns out, hey, the body in the grave wasn't George's body. So it's like, well, whose body was it? Just some random person? But then, like, when they show the Finola thing, I was almost thinking, I'm like, oh, wait, are we going to show that Finola knew or something, or she did something, or handed him something that set this all in motion? But it's like, no, she took off his watch. But then there's like 20 some minutes of footage missing from the camera. And then all of a sudden, when the body's put away, they see that the watch, whoever replaced his body didn't realize, like, oh, the watch had been taken. Now, that means someone had to potentially bring George back to life or something. Because, like, why wouldn't he pick up on a detail? Well, not unless he was still, like, he might have been dead at that moment, whoever took him. So George might not be the brains of the operation. It might be that he is kind of being held hostage, like someone used the debris to temporarily reanimate him or something like that. So it's like whoever Influx really is, because at first I was thinking George might be the head of Influx, but it's like, no, it seems like there might be some larger power at play, some higher player, and then like at the end of the day, George is just a part to this. Because that's what I was about to say, like, why would you leave out such a detail like the watch? Because if George had woken up and was like, all right, let's go, he would have pointed out, oh yeah, plus the body's got the watch, my watch is gone. So it was something that happened while he was dead. So they just made the switch, not realizing Finola took it as a super memento of her dad. To be fair, the fake body or whatever, whoever the body that ended up being in the grave, could have been something that was set up so far in advance that it was just kind of a quick shift that they didn't notice, and that's why the watch was one. It was just meant to be a convincing enough double, whatever the circumstances may be. So sets up a lot of interesting stuff. It is interesting though. At the end of the day, like obviously, Brian says this line I thought was interesting, where he was like, sometimes you forget that there's still magic out there in the world, which even Finola's like, yeah, I do. But, a lot of people have a tendency to kind of forget that too. But because a lot of this isn't just debris related. There's, like I said, a lot of this stuff, the access point stuff already existed. It's just the debris helped showcase something that humanity would have spent their entire lives never knowing was right there in front of them. They just couldn't see it. But yeah, a lot of, like I said, a lot of interesting developments. I'm curious to ultimately see where all of this ends up taking us going forward into the next episode. But really, that's all I want to talk about. Until the next time we meet, be happy, be safe, live life to the fullest, and enjoy it. Good day and goodbye.